Hey everybody, Yankee here. You know, I'm in the process of building a couple PSA guns just to test them out and see if they're any good or not. One of the guns I'm building to give away here, which is the zombie gun, I should have that completed this coming week and we'll be giving that away soon. But right now I'm also building a compact version here that will be for my son, Caden. He's going to have this as a little range toy for down on our range. And while I've been building the PSA, I made the mistake on camera in front of all the Glocktards of saying that I think that the PSA, the Palmetto State Armory frame, might be better built than the Glock frame. It just might be better overall. Well, as you can guess, that irritated some people. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to take a PSA frame here and a Glock frame that are the same size. I'm going to take them apart. We're going to compare the frames and all the internals and see which one looks like it might have the edge. We'll see which one of these two items here comes out on top and which one might have to settle for a reach around. All right, first thing we gotta do is get them taken apart. And the first thing I wanna say here though, before I do, is that there's one point I'm gonna be giving to the Glock, and that is that the Palmetto State one uses actual roll pins instead of just polymer pins. I'm not a big fan of roll type pins, so I wish they had something you could replace those with, or they just didn't use them at all. I don't know if you can replace them, but I will be looking into it because I do not like roll pins. And in case you didn't know, that's a roll pin. You know, it's a little rolled piece of steel instead of a solid pin. Well, it definitely came apart easy once you get that out. So there, we got everything out right now. Frame is bare. See, now this is one of the actual pins Glock uses. I much prefer these to roll pins. I like them better and they come out easier. All right, and everything should just pop right out. All right, once you have these guns apart, the first thing you'll notice is that they're very similar, but there are some differences. One of the differences being that the frame on the Palmetto State Armory Dagger is just a little thicker in most spots. It's especially better in the front, where it actually has a rimmed front. It actually has a reinforced front end, so it's sturdier. And like I said, it is thicker. If you squeeze on both of them, you can actually feel the give more on the Glock than you can on the Palmetto. The Palmetto is just sturdier, but they also scratch very similarly. If you go inside the mag well there and give them a little scratch. So the polymers seem very similar. There's just more of it in the PSA frame. Now, one big difference you're going to notice is that the front rails on the Glock are actually embedded in the plastic here, whereas on the PSA, they're actually part of the block. The block is not separate from that, unlike on the Glock. If you look at the two side by side, you can really see the difference of design here, and you can see why the pins are positioned differently, because the block on the Glock is actually held in place by the trigger pin and then another pin that goes in right above that and slightly behind it to keep it from pivoting up. The one on the PSA is pinned at the back with the trigger pin and then has the pin keeping it from flipping up in the front, and the rails are actually attached to all of that. That's a far superior design as far as I'm concerned. There's nothing wrong with the way Glock does it. I just think the one piece is better, and having the two pins further apart like that makes it a little bit more stable mechanically. But like I said, you can't argue with the way Glock does it because it works just fine. You'll also notice a big difference back here when you look at where the trigger housing goes in. You can see on the Glock, it's once again rails that are embedded into the plastic here. They're fully embedded here. They're solid. They work. But on the PSA, it's one solid piece of metal that wraps all the way around, has the rails attached, and goes down into the gun and is held in place by the same pin that holds the housing in. So I like this design a lot better. It's not as, I guess maybe not as refined as the Glock, but I think it's sturdier and it seems a lot better mechanically. So I would give the nod to the way they do it. I just never like it when the metal is embedded into the plastic. I always see that as a weak point. So I like the fact here that it's just metal attached to metal and held in with a pin. And actually, speaking of those trigger housings that go in here, If you look at them side by side, I will say I like the trigger on the Glock a lot better, the actual physical trigger. I do not like that M&P-like trigger on the PSA. I hope they change that in the future. But if you look at it, it's very similar. The metal all seems to be similar thickness, similar quality. The plastic is a little more substantial, the actual housing itself on the PSA, which is, good. Doesn't mean a whole lot, but I do like how it is a little sturdier. When it comes right down to it, there's not a whole lot of difference here. I like the way Glock does some things, and I like the way PSA does some other things. So, pretty much a wash here. They function pretty much exactly the same. They go in the same. They have the same mechanisms. I will say if I was going to give one an edge, it would be the PSA just a little bit because, like I said, the plastic does feel more substantial and it does seem a little bit sturdier. As far as the slide stops, they're pretty much indistinguishable. If you look at them, you're not going to really tell much difference. And if you look at the pins, I've already said I like the pins of the Glock better than I do the PSA. Now, as far as other things like which grip texture do you like better or which grip shape do you like better, well, that's going to be on you. That's going to be very subjective. I personally like the PSA better. It fits my hand better. I like how it doesn't have all the finger grooves like the Glock does. I just like everything about it better, including the stippling and the way it looks. I do like the trigger guard better on the PSA also. It seems to be cut better for my fingers, but I will say that I do like the mag release better on the Glock. It's more substantial and it just seems to work much more easily, so I do like that. As far as the mag wells go here, not a lot of difference. Now, I do have a little butt plug in my Glock here. I don't have one for the PSA. Don't know if they make one or not. If they do, I'll get them. But still, not a lot of difference here until you look at them from the side and then you see that the PSA is cut a lot more, has more of an area there to get your fingers in to remove the magazine. This Glock is a Gen 4, I do believe. I think the Gen 5s might have that. Not sure, but if they do, well, then that's a wash also. But if not, well, then the PSA is a little better. The only thing mechanical we haven't touched on yet is pretty much the takedown lever, and they function, well, pretty much exactly the same. There ain't really any difference between them, so you ain't making any decisions based on that. Another thing, even though I don't know exactly what it's for, that little piece of metal in the front of the PSA there makes me happy because I like seeing as much metal as possible, so I'm going to give it a point for that. All right, everybody, after completely disassembling both of these guns, comparing piece to piece, comparing the frames side by side, I'm going to have to stick with what I said. I think the PSA is actually a Glock clone that is actually made better than the Glock. I really like the way the frame is stouter, the way it has more supports in some places. I like how some of the pieces are just solid metal instead of metal plastic combined. I just like pretty much everything better the way PSA does it. I think it's pretty clear that PSA puts a little more time, a little more effort. They actually wanted their gun to be a little better, which is surprising because the Glock is much more expensive. So even if you don't agree with me on which one might be marginally better build-wise, I think if you actually build one of these PSA guns, you're going to have to agree that they're at least the better bang for your buck.